Episode 95 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. In particular, welcome to all of my Chinese-speaking viewers, since presumably all the other ones who don't speak Chinese presumably won't be watching this. I wouldn't if I was you, so I guess I'm just speaking to the Chinese speakers. Very good day to all of you. Back with another episode of a Chinese episode of the Interpretation Station for you. And I'm joined once again by my new trusty right-hand lady when it comes to Chinese, Zoe.
Hi.
How are you, Zoe?
Good. How are you?
I am very well, thank you very much, on this Sunday evening. It's where I'm. It's Sunday evening, 25 to 8. Getting late. Be dinner time soon for me. Over with Zoe is California. She's still
Sunday morning.
Sunday morning.
Ish. Yeah.
Lucky Zoe. She doesn't have to work for another 24 hours. I can already feel the doom of work tomorrow morning approaching, but I'll be all right. Well, we have got a very special episode for you guys today. It's a slightly different from what we usually do, because we're not going to be looking at a specific text as we usually do. Rather, what we're going to be looking at is, well, this episode is going to be devoted to the UN Charter. So if any of you guys out there, if you've got ambitions to work at the UN, or if you've got any plans to take the UN competitive exam, and to be honest, if you've got any plans to work in international relations, you know, interpreting in that field, in the media, in politics, one of the sort of cornerstone documents of the whole international system, the sort of rules of the game, if you like, is the UN Charter. That's what pretty much the whole world of multilateralism, however creaking at the seams though it is, that's what it's all built on the UN Charter. And so, I mean, if you ever do the exam, if you work in the Charter, people will no doubt advise you that to read through the Charter, and that's good advice. You know, that's what I did when I was preparing myself for working at the UN. You read through the Charter. The thing is, you read through the Charter, and okay, you know, a few things sort of stay in your head, but you don't really know exactly what the important stuff is, what's not so important. So that's where I come in. That's where the Interpretation Station comes in, you see, because I've been doing this now for 11 years, and I've been working in like Security Council, General Assembly, all that sort of thing. So I sort of know my way around it quite a bit. And you see, I know what the important stuff in the UN Charter is, the stuff you should really be focusing on. So what me and Zoe are going to be doing today in this episode is we're going to take you through the Charter, and I'm going to be basically telling you what the key parts of the Charter are, what the stuff is that you should really be focusing on, what stuff is not such a big deal. So that'll basically, you know, it'll give you an idea when you come to sort of preparing for your exam or preparing to the UN, you'll actually know what you should look at and what you should know. So like I say, Zoe is here to help us do this. Now, before we actually get cracking with the UN Charter, when I had the idea of doing the show and when we were discussing it, me and Zoe, and I sent her, you know, all the important phrases from the Charter. I said, Zoe, okay, look these up for me in Chinese, because as you know, my Chinese isn't really that great, I must admit. And so Zoe came back to me. It's a a little bit rusty. Zoe came back to me with some surprising news that I'd never known about. Now you guys might know it already, but if you've not actually ever opened a copy of the UN Charter and you've never done this before, you might be in for a surprise. I think Zoe was slightly surprised. So at this point, I will hand over the floor, as we say at the UN, to Zoe, and she will tell you what's so surprising? Zoe.
Yeah, right. So I did a bit of research on the UN Charter. I went to the UN website, and I was slightly taken aback by the Chinese translation because the Chinese that is used in the translation is not readily understandable to me. And then I realized back in 1945, so when the charter was created and adopted, the Republic of China was a member of the UN. But now it's the People's Republic of China. And the form or the type of Chinese that they use is quite different. So I'm going to provide you with first the version that's the official translation, and then I will provide you with another version in brackets, which is what you will probably hear in the UN.
Okay, so this is such a quirk of history, it seems. And so it's like, am I right in saying, so this original Chinese, the sort of is a bit like something similar to like Shakespearean English? Or is that going a bit
Slightly, it's
far,
like
but it's
a
like
mixture. It's a mixture, yeah. Of like classical Chinese. I can sense a bits of classical Chinese there, especially in the translation of the preamble, which reads a bit like a poem. Yeah, but not for the rest of the charter. Yeah, it's a mix of classical Chinese and
a
modern
bit
Chinese.
archaic, sort of. Some of the Chinese, some of it's quite
Yeah,
archaic. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
as we'll see when we're going through it, there's a couple of examples of that actually in the English version. There's a couple of turns of phrase that you will hardly ever hear used nowadays in UN meetings, and the phrase they will use is a much more modern sounding one. I'll point that out to you when we get there. I won't spoil the surprise. I'm sure you can't wait for to find out what it is. But yeah, so what we're going to do is we're just going to take you, starting at the beginning of the charter, the preamble, and we'll take you through to the end. And I will be stopping, as I say, at the important points, what the important articles are, what the important expressions are, and hopefully I can shed some light, provide some clarity for you, so that you will know what to expect and what expressions to know when the time comes, when you're sitting there at the UN waiting to do your competitive exam. Although these days you're more like you're probably not going to get invited to come to the UN. You probably have to do it from the comfort of your own home. But either way, so Zoe
Let's get
has
started.
kindly prepared for us. Okay, the charter with the three versions. So as I say, you'll see. So what we've got, what you will see, we're going the whole English version is up. And then then we have the two Chinese versions. So the first Chinese version, if you would just point to that, Zoe, yeah. So that is the source version. That's the original charter language, and then in the brackets next to it is Zoe's version of how you would render that in modern Mandarin. Okay. Okay, so before we start, what the first thing you come to? By the way, the charter. Do you know when and where it was signed, Zoe?
San Francisco. Yeah.
1945.
1945.
So if you ever hear talk of the spirit of San Francisco, which they occasionally talk about, that's what it refers to, because that's where it was originally signed. I understand that they were originally planning, I don't know, this might be hearsay, but it may have some sense, that they were originally planning to have the United Nations based in San Francisco, but that the Soviet Union thought that it would be a bit too far away from Moscow, I guess. I guess New York is quite a bit, okay, it's still the United States, but it's still considerably closer to Europe than San Francisco, which is really virtually on the other side of the world. Have you charter? So on the screen, you will see the preamble. Now, one thing I would say with the preamble is, if I were you, and I say I was about to work at the UN and or to take a test, I would make an attempt. I would try and learn the preamble, learn it in English and learn it in Chinese, the whole thing. I will just read it to you in English, just to so you can let the words soak into your memory, okay? So, we, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom, and for these ends to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, and to ensure by the acceptance of principles and the institution of methods that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, and to employ international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all peoples, have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims. Accordingly, our respective governments, through representatives assembled in the city of San Francisco, who've exhibited their full powers, found to be, okay, this bit you don't really need to know. So it's the bit before that up to pretty much the advancement of all peoples. I would advise you to learn that by heart. You will notice in the that preamble, I've highlighted a couple of segments of it. If you just scroll that, yeah, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, of nations large and small, and is it maintenance of international peace and security? I mean, they're the three important, really important bits from that preamble, but I would make an attempt to try and memorize it, learn it by heart. Perhaps, Zoe, you could give us your own rendering of this, the original Chinese, perhaps, so I can hear it.
Yeah, right. Right. So, first part, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, 预免后世再遭战祸. My version is 使后世免遭战祸. Quite similar. Of nations large and small, 大小各国. My version is 世界各国不论大小. I mean, if I'm doing simultaneous, I'll probably opt for 大小各国, like the original, because it's just faster,
right?
And it's understandable. It's just not commonly used. But it's not weird. Yeah.
If you're trying to impress someone, I would perhaps say go for the original. I'm just thinking
go for the original,
because that way they know that you've really done your homework.
Yeah, right. Yeah, to maintain international peace and security, 维持国际和平及安全. My version is 维护国际和平与安全. That is what like Chinese representatives always say. So I say maybe stick to this version, to the latter version.
Okay.
Because that's what you're going to hear, in the UN. Yeah. But it's pretty similar. Right. Shall we move on to?
That was it. Was that it? You did the whole thing.
Yeah, that's it. That's
bloody
the 3 parts. Yes. So which means it's really difficult if you go from Chinese into English.
Yeah, when you.
Yeah.
I thought you'd done maybe a couple of lines or something. Then okay, that's one of the joys of the Chinese language. It makes it must be great going English into Chinese and hell going the other way. So, all right. So yeah, remember these 3 then in particular. I'd say maintain international peace and security is possibly the most important expression in the whole charter. I mean, I don't think it's a factor in Chinese, but for example, when we're coming from French, you're told when you hear in the French, because it's like entretenir la paix et la sécurité internationale. You're always told just hold off a minute before you launch into the maintain peace and security, because the chances are the international is going to come straight after. But again, right, in Chinese, you go.
It's not the problem in Chinese,
because
the word order here is the same. So
Oh, all
you go
right.
for international first.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's good.
Okay, so that's the preamble for you. Learn it. Okay, international, by the way, yeah, international machinery. See that expression? That's that you'll hear that. So if you, I don't know what the image is that is conjured up in the Chinese, but for example, in again in the English booth, if you hear like it from in Spanish, they say maquinaria. So it is just machinery. That is the word. Okay, so.
But not in Chinese.
Not in Chinese. It's a different sort of image.
I'm looking at the original. Yeah, it's so the original translation. If I translate that back into English, that's international institutions.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, but
okay.
international machinery means international institutions.
Basically, yeah. Oh, the whole network of it. Yeah. I mean, that would be fine. That would be fine.
Right.
But there would be no problem. But so if you hear it, the international machinery, if you're hearing that in the English, know that that's what that refers to. Okay, so don't think that the speaker's speaking strangely, but that's just an accepted phrase. Okay, the international machinery. Okay, so if you would kindly scroll down to the next bit. Okay, now this is perhaps after maintenance of international peace and security, the purposes and principles. They talk about the purposes and principles all the time. And how would you say that? How do you say that in Chinese?
Yes.
How do you say it?
So, 宗旨和原则.
Okay.
宗旨和原则. I just said that. It's too quick. Yeah. Or 宗旨及原则, but I think delegates tend to say 宗旨和原则, and it's often used in these phrases in Chinese. 遵循联合国宪章宗旨和原则. Like adhere to the purposes and principles of
adhering
the
to
Charter.
Exactly. So it's pretty, in English,
that's
relatively easy to remember. You got the P and the P, purposes and principles. No one's also going to kill you if you say principles and purposes. They come as a package. But okay, so then what I've highlighted in blue in the English that's just really to show you how these sort of important expressions keep cropping up again and again. So again, to maintain international peace and security. Now here is an interesting phrase down here. So the adjustment or settlement of international disputes. I should have highlighted disputes. So how would you say that? How do you say that in Chinese?
I actually translated this bit, so dispute all situations.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. 调整或解决国际争端或形式. So 争端 is disputes. Situations. The original is 情势, but nowadays it's probably 形势, 国际形势. Yeah, just collocations, but people understand. Okay.
And so with these, so in English, the adjustment or settlement, it's very rare to hear adjustment, actually, adjustment of disputes. So in English, you're more like, settlement of disputes. These days, you're more like to hear resolution. Okay, dispute resolution, that's a big sort of buzz phrase. So I guess you could, again, if you want to impress, it's adjustment, but the two in English, the two best synonyms to remember are settlement and resolution. Okay, dispute resolution.
Okay. Right. So I want to ask you.
Yep.
Are you suggesting that adjustment and settlement mean the same thing in English?
I think the idea is they're pretty close. Yeah. Like I say,
identical.
Adjustment. I've never used.
Right. Yeah, I've never heard
in
of
English, to be honest. There may be a subtle nuance between. There might be a subtle nuance to it, but we talk about generally settlement or resolution. I guess an adjustment might be fall slightly short of a complete settlement.
Right.
It's rare that you will hear that in English.
Yeah, same in Chinese. I've never heard 调整.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's the original.
So weird.
Yeah.
The original, but I mean, delegates don't really say adjustment, so you don't really hear.
It's right. Is it a bit sort of archaic? Huh?
Yeah, I feel like you are tuning some instrument.
Well, yeah,
Just
right,
doing-
right. I guess that's similar. Yeah, just yeah. So it's the same, really the same idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. This is an interesting. So here I've highlighted without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, and it's interesting. Okay, so this is used a lot today. This is often mentioned in many different contexts. The funny thing is, usually it's the foreign, say it's coming from French or Spanish, the way I would usually interpret it, just coming from the other language, would be without discrimination on the basis of race, sex, language, or religion. That's how it usually sounds coming from the other language. So it's interesting for me to see this wording used in the English. This is a bit shorter, actually, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. So that's a slightly quicker way of saying without discrimination on the basis of. So how would you say that in Chinese?
不分种族、性别、语言或宗教, which is even shorter. Like without distinction as to, it's just these two characters. 不分.
Right.
Yeah.
And is the word for distinction and discrimination, is it the same, like racial discrimination? I'm just for my own curiosity.
No, it's not the same.
Not say it's a different word.
But yeah, in this phrase, it's almost a set phrase. You just say 部分 A, B, C, and D.
Right.
Yeah, without distinction. Yeah.
Okay, let's go on. Okay, this is a very important concept when in the UN and the whole multilateral world. The idea of sovereign equality of all member states. That's like really a core concept that will get invoked all the time, regardless of all nations, large or small. The point is there's equality between them. And so, what's that in the Chinese?
主权平等, which is a direct translation, so it's quite easy to remember.
So that's the same. So the original,
that's
not changed
that's
in any way.
Yeah.
Okay. And you'll see here, look, you can see purposes stated in Article 1, principles. Okay, so go on. Okay, this is just interesting wording here. Fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed by them. This is just interesting because these are often these words that going into English, you need to really have them at the ready immediately. These little collocations, fulfill obligations, assume obligations. Sometimes you'll say commitments. It's just interesting that you see it in the charter. They talk about obligations. They don't tend to talk much about commitments. And maybe that's because maybe commitments is a slightly newer word in that. So maybe it was always obligations back then. In good faith, that's another important notion to have at the ready. Often another word like a synonym of in good faith. A word that I really struggle to pronounce is scrupulously. That can be used as a synonym for in good faith. Good faith is easier to say. You can talk about good faith actors, bad faith actors, scrupulous actors, unscrupulous actors. So just these words, there's nothing particularly historical or anything interesting about this phrase. It's just the use of the vocab that you have there. And so in the Chinese, what is it?
So the original 一秉善意, so this part is actually in good faith. 履行其依本宪章所担负之义务. So it's relatively long, but so 其依本宪章, that's actually in accordance with the present charter. Yeah, so it's kind of together. But so my version is 切实履行其承担义务. Obviously, I got rid of the in accordance with. And for in good faith, I use 切实. So I often hear like delegates or representatives say in good faith, and I used to have trouble finding the Chinese equivalent. I thought there wasn't one. But then I realized this phrase 切实, which is often used by Chinese representatives, and I used to have a hard time finding an English equivalent. Now I realize they are kind of, yeah, equivalent.
Is that right? And good. So that's the expression you've been looking for. Huh?
Yeah, that's kind of it.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's the expression that I've been looking for. 一柄善意, I've never heard of this. So,
Okay.
yeah, probably not going to remember it. Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on then. So paragraph 3 here, article, whatever article it is, paragraph 3. Refrain from the threat. This is an important one. Refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. So you'll hear this used a lot also in like discussions about nuclear weapons, like in the Conference on Disarmament Commission, when the sort of smaller countries say to the big, the nuclear powers that you've got to refrain from the threat or you hear it more nowadays as they must refrain from the use or the threat of the use of force against the territorial integrity. So that's an important expression. Also, refrain from, often you'll also hear abstain from, desist from. So it's interesting that the Charter went with refrain from. Territorial integrity, hugely important concept. That whole thing, territorial integrity or political independence of any state. So how does that read in the Chinese?
Right. So the whole thing is 不得使用威胁或武力侵害任何会员国或国家之领土完整或政治独立. So that's the original. So my version is 不得使用或威胁使用武力侵害任何国家的领土完整或政治独立. So territorial integrity and political independence remain unchanged, and it's basically the direct translation. What I slightly altered is here 不得使用或威胁使用. That's also what you will hear in the what's that? Was that DC Disarmament Conference? So in the first committee.
Okay. The first committee of the General Assembly, yeah.
Yeah.
But what were you saying about DC? Sorry, in the Disarmament Commission.
Disarmament Conference.
No, okay. This is an important thing to know the difference. You have the Conference on Disarmament.
That's the
CD.
Oh, that's the CD.
That's based in Geneva. That's based in Geneva. And then in Vienna, you have the Disarmament Commission. That's the DC.
Okay.
So they have different mandates, actually. They cover different stuff. There's the CD on the one hand and the DC on the other. So there is a difference. Okay, let's go on to paragraph 4. So I highlighted here enforcement action. But I mean, actually, throughout, you'll see they really refer to this a lot, preventive or enforcement action. So again, it's good to be able to recognize that. The enforcement action is basically giving it some of that if a country's misbehaving. How do you say that in the Chinese?
So it's 执行行动. Again, it's literal translation. 执行 for enforcement, 行动 for action.
Okay. So again, just good to know that.
It's like law enforcement.
A bit, yeah, but it just means basically, cracking the whip on with the bad boys. Yeah. Again, here we have maintenance of international peace and security. You'll see again, shall not at the bottom of Article 6, application of enforcement measures. So this is a big thing. Okay, Article 5, there again, preventive or enforcement action. Okay, this is important. Okay, so Chapter 2 is not that interesting. But Chapter 3 is an important one, okay, because it tells you now what the main organs are. Don't be afraid of using that word. Okay, that's the first thing I'd say. Organs, right? That's what they're referred to at the UN. This was a thing because sometimes going into English, you have this. You can sort of be caught up in this dilemma. Do I say bodies or entities or whatever. So with the UN, they're organs. So, and the principal organs, as opposed, you'll see it when it scrolls down a little bit later, you'll see the subsidiary organs. Right there, and there you go, there's Article 2. So the principal organs, you have them listed here: the General Assembly, Security Council, Economic and Social Council, Trusteeship Council, International Court of Justice, and Secretariat. Now, of these, okay, so we know the General Assembly, Security Council, very important. Economic and Social Council is also very important. So they're based in New York, and you'll often hear them referred to as ECOSOC. Does that sound from? Have you heard that, Zoe? Okay, they're called ECOSOC.
Yeah.
That's what it's usually compressed down to. Now, I haven't highlighted the Trusteeship Council because nowadays, to be honest, it's not that important. So the Trusteeship Council was originally created. Again, this was all created, back in the 1940s, where you had still a lot of countries under colonial rule. And the idea was that the Trusteeship Council would assist these countries in the process of getting independence from their colonial powers. So I guess it was probably pretty relevant back in when were all the big independence movements happening, like in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, whatever. Nowadays, it's still there. It's still got an agenda. They still convene from time to time. They still have conferences, but it's really not what it once was. So if you're curious, what's left on the Trusteeship Council's agenda? Possibly the most important situation that's left in it is that of the Western Sahara, which is part officially of Morocco. So Morocco has sovereignty over it. There's a big sovereignty dispute over the Western Sahara between the people in the Western Sahara, who are called the Sahrawi, okay, and Algeria. And so the Moroccans and the Algerians, they really don't like each other. And this is one of the major bones of contention between them, because the Algerians in Algiers, there is this huge refugee camp called Tindouf refugee camp, which hosts virtually the entire Sahrawi population. And then the Moroccans accuse the Algerians of basically harboring terrorist groups within that huge camp. And it's, again, the Algerians accuse the Moroccans of being responsible for the last colonial situation in Africa, that they're a colonial power and all that. And so you'll often suddenly, at the UN, you'd think you'll have a completely neutral subject, and then just suddenly the Moroccans and the Algerians will start kicking off, lobbing mutual accusations at each other out of nothing. So it's just worth knowing that the Western Saharan situation is something to just keep vaguely on your radar. Other things on the Trusteeships Council that are left: Puerto Rico, Gibraltar, the Falkland Islands falls, Malvinas, whichever flavor you prefer, that falls under the agenda of the Trusteeship Council. But yeah, it's not, as I say, as big a player as it once was. International Court of Justice, that is important. Okay, that's an important institution. And okay, the Secretariat's easy enough. So how would you call? What's the Chinese for these? How do you say the principal organs?
I'll start with the principal organs. The original translation is 主要机关, but nowadays for organ, we don't say 机关, we say 机构. It's just one word difference. Yeah, but it's collocation again. GA, 联大. So there are two ways of saying it. If it's UNGA, then it's 联大 in Chinese. If it's just General Assembly, then it's 大会. Yeah, anyway, there are two ways of saying that. Security Council, 安全理事会 or 安理会, SC. Economic and Social Council is 经济及社会理事会. That's the original, and it's still this. So what's in the bracket is just ECOSOC. That's the Chinese abbreviation.
Oh, they'll say ECOSOC, okay.
Yeah, so it's an abbreviation. You just leave a few characters out. Yeah.
And what are they? So, what's the
Right.
Chinese for the trusteeship council? It's good just to know the names.
It's 托管理事会.
Okay,
So
so there you
council
go.
is 理事会, trusteeship is 托管. International Court of Justice, 国际法院. Initially, I thought it's 国际法庭, but no, it's 法院. Secretariat is 秘书处.
International Court of Justice, you'll sometimes also hear that referred to just the ICJ. So that's an important
yeah.
acronym to
Yeah.
recognize. Okay. And I guess
Right.
it's useful as
Yeah.
well if you hear it in the Chinese, you don't have to say the full name, you just call it the ICJ. Everyone knows what the ICJ is.
Yeah. I've actually two questions.
Yeah.
So ICJ, there's also ICC. Is ICC part of the UN?
That's interesting. I'm going to come
Criminal
to that.
Code.
That is a specialized agency. I'm going to come to
Oh,
it's
that's
the
a
International
specialized
Criminal Court. I'm
court,
going to so it's related. It comes under the sort of auspices, I guess, of the UN. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Another question is technical.
Don't confuse the two, because you might, when you're new,
Okay.
you might
Yeah.
confuse the two. So it's different. ICJ will sort of rule on disputes to do with sovereignty and that sort of thing between states, whereas the ICC, the International Criminal Court, rules on things like war crimes, genocide, that sort of thing. You probably
Crimes
hear
against
more.
humanity,
Exactly.
yeah.
You're actually probably more likely to hear more about the ICC, to be honest, in the news than you are the ICJ.
Okay.
And so the subsidiary, okay, so yes, the subsidiary organs. You've got two things. You've got subsidiary organs and specialized agencies. So they're not quite the same thing. So the subsidiary organs, I'm just going to give you an example of subsidiary organs. You have the Disarmament Committee. So as we mentioned before, the DC in Vienna. Disarmament Commission, Disarmament Commission, I beg your pardon, Disarmament Commission. The Peace Building Commission, which is quite an important commission. You have also the Human Rights Council is a subsidiary organ of ECOSOC or the General Assembly. But it's a subsidiary organ. And you also have UNEP is a subsidiary, are examples. You can find out there's a whole list of them if you go to the UN website and you just search up subsidiary organs. All these boards, there's lots of boards that you have, advisory boards or auditing boards of auditors. They fall under they fall under the category of subsidiary organs. Now you mentioned, I say, the International Criminal Court, the ICC. Now that is a specialized agency. So specialized agencies are like FAO, Food Agricultural Organization, the International Atomic Energy Association, the IAEA, UNESCO, the WHO, World Health Organization. That is a specialized agency. WIPO, do you know who WIPO are?
Yeah, patent, intellectual property.
They're becoming a big player nowadays. So yeah, the WIPO. So those are specialized agencies. So just again, you can go to the UN and you can just Google subsidiary organs, or you can Google specialized agencies, and you can find them. So that gives you just a few examples of what's what. Okay, let's go on.
Wait, let me give the translation.
Say what's the subsidiary organs in Chinese?
Yeah, so it's 辅助机关 in the original, but nowadays you are probably going to hear 附属机构. Yeah. And I have one question for you. What's the difference between the Human Rights Council and the OHCHR or OCHA? Do you actually call it OCHA?
That's Office of Humanitarian. OCHA is different. That's Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance. Are you thinking of
the High Commission?
The High Commissioner on Human Rights. Yeah, okay. So the Human Rights Council is, every country has a seat within the human rights. Oh, you've got members of the Human Rights Council. That's like a sort of deliberative body, I guess. That's their sort of little parliament where they discuss human rights issues. Whereas the OHCHR, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, is more, that's headed by the commissioner, who is Michelle Bachelet, and they're like they're sort of more like a part of the secretariat. So the council is more like a council, a huge, great committee with all the countries have the membership. You have members and observers, whereas the OHCHR is more like a secretariat-like body. It's a sort of implementing body.
Good.
Okay, again, you can just see here, maintenance of international peace and security. Lots comes up again and again. I think I gave up highlighting it after a while because it comes up so often. Okay, so this here in Article 13, this is just a useful phrase to know because it's used a lot in some of the more legalistic sort of committees at the UN, the progressive development of international law and its codification. For example, if you ever in a meeting of what's called the General Assembly Sixth Committee, that's like does all the legal stuff, and you've got these committees like the first committee does all the nuclear stuff, second committee is like racial discrimination, something like that. Third committee is more to do with sort of environmental, social issues. The sixth committee tackles very legalistic stuff, and so this is something they constantly refer to, the progressive development of international law and its codification. Also, what's the other? The International Law Committee. They meet in Geneva, and that's like it's just building this corpus, I guess, of international law. So, what is that in the Chinese?
Right. So the original is 国际法之逐渐发展与编纂. My version is 国际法的逐步发展与编纂. I guess the key word to remember is how to translate codification.
Right.
Yeah, and it's the same 编纂. Yeah. Not an easy word to pronounce.
Right. Even for you,
not an easy word to write.
Is it like scrupulous?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Then realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Okay, that's a very important idea that basically has been untouched for the last 80 years. Just interesting that they go with realization of human rights. Perhaps in English we tend more nowadays to talk about exercise or enjoyment of. I always think realization is a bit of a cheat because that's what they use in French. And you always feel a bit like when they say réalisation, you just turn it into the realization. You think, yeah, it doesn't sound quite right in English, but it's interesting that they use it in the original charter. And you again there have the without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. In the Chinese, is there anything unusual in that phrase or?
So realization is 实现, which is basically realization in English. And this verb or noun is really versatile in Chinese. So if you don't know which verb to use, you can maybe use that.
Okay.
So it's kind of a cheat as well.
Okay, that's
fair. Yeah.
Got to do what you got to do, haven't you?
Right. 人权及基本自由之实现. This is a written version, so the order is inverted. So it's human rights and fundamental freedoms realization. My version is more like simultaneous interpreting. 实现人权与基本自由. So realization comes first, and then human rights.
So the point is they often come as a package, certainly. Yeah. Human rights and fundamental freedoms. Yeah. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so here again they're using this adjustment, peaceful adjustment of any situation. What's in the Chinese that is
和平调整. So that's peaceful adjustment.
Okay, so again, this is one of these, they use it quite a bit, I've noticed now in the English version, this adjustment. Again, you're unlikely to hear it much nowadays, but if you do and you've watched this episode, you'll know, that I'll just say whatever the Chinese word for settlement is, which is
解决.
So don't let the word throw you. Just like it just threw Zoe, okay? Just means settlement. Okay. Let's go on. Again, more maintaining international peace and security. Performing functions. They often perform, I don't know if that in the Chinese, if you look at just Article 16 there, they use this collocation a lot, performing functions. The General Assembly shall perform functions. I don't know if there's anything special in the Chinese version that's worth noting there.
I don't think so.
Okay, so just to know, so it's
Yeah.
an interesting little collocation in English, perform functions. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's
So
just
here's the
specialized
mention.
agencies.
Specialized agencies. Okay. So as I say, things like FAO, IAEA, ICC, WIPO, etc. Okay.
So it's 专门机关 or
Aha,
专门
yeah, the
机
Chinese.
构. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. So now voting. Now, what's interesting here? So I've highlighted, okay, maintenance of international peace and security goes without saying. The non-permanent members of the Security Council. Now, I've highlighted that just because, so obviously you have the permanent members of the Security Council, which are China, Russia, France, UK, and the US. And you have also the non-permanent members. Now, the point is here, it took me a little while just to, when I first started working at the UN, to not say temporary members. Okay, they're not temporary members, even though they are essentially, but the wording, the in-house nomenclature is the non-permanent members, of whom I believe there are 12, I think, who rotate. They get a 2-year crack at it, being non-permanent members. No veto, you obviously know. So it's only the permanents who have the veto. Non-permanent members don't have a veto. It was the good thing at the when I was in New York. So at New York, just here's just a little anecdote. You see, we were always allowed. The way assignments were arranged for the Security Council was you apply to do a given month. At the start of each year, you'd have the sheet saying who the president was for each month. Now, it's always a much bigger deal for the non-permanent members than it is for the permanents. The permanents do it all the time. So who cares, you know? Whereas for the non-permanents, they've got those 2 years during which they'll get maybe 2 presidencies. Some only one, some of them 2. It just depends how the cookie crumbles. So they might not get back on it for many years after that. So for them, it's a really big deal. And at the end of each month, they will host, most of them will host a big party, a big sort of reception to mark the end of their month of presidency. And a lot of them will actually invite the interpreters. Not all, but a lot will invite the interpreters and the conference staff to come. And I would always choose which month to do based on the cuisine. So when India was on the Security Council, I was in there like a flash, wanted India. Korea, I was in for Korea, love Korean food, delicious. So that's how I would choose which months to apply for. Libya, I think I did Libya once. Ooh, that was some lovely lamb they had. They had old roast lamb. Oh, it's great. Yeah, so anyway, that's a little anecdote. Tell me, non-permanent members, permanent members in Chinese.
Well, I didn't know the perks that you got. Security Council. Oh my God. Okay, right. Non-permanent members, 非常任理事国. So 常任 is in permanent members, is 常任理事国. So it's just basically you put that non, so that 非 before permanent members. It works out in English, yeah.
Okay, so just like it's important when you're going into the English, you know, if you were to say the temporary, like if China was speaking, they said a temporary member, and the guy behind is listening, they're sort of pulled up on. You need to know that have that well. That you need to know that by heart, permanent and non-permanent members. Yeah. And then, okay, so here we've got the admission of new members. So you get admitted to it. You don't accede to the United Nations, you accede to treaties, okay, ACCEDE. But if you get let into a club, if you get let into the UN, you are admitted. It's the same for the European Union. You talk about, I think, you admit it. No, you accede to the European accession. But with the UN, it's admission. You get let in. Yeah, that's actually an interesting little difference. The EU, you accede to the EU, but you get admitted to the UN. And in the Chinese?
There's nothing special in the Chinese. 新会员加入. I just added 联合国 because, I mean, this is not an alternative version. It's the translation of this entire bit. And even if you highlight just this bit, I feel like you have to add 加入联合国, like the UN, or else it wouldn't make sense in Chinese, like grammatically. So the Chinese is more mundane, I guess. It's like the
Okay.
joining
Okay.
of new
Okay.
members. So maybe we don't have that many fancy legalese.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. The General Assembly. It's rules of procedure. Chinese.
议事规则.
Okay. The funny thing is they talk about the General Assembly's rules of procedure, and I don't know if they mention the Security Council rules
Right,
of
yeah.
procedure. But the Security Council rules of procedure, if you just scroll down,
I don't think so.
I don't
Maybe
think it's
the
any mentioned because the
highlights there.
Security Council rules of procedure are quite an interesting little caveat. There's a sort of interesting caveat with those because they are still, to this day, they are still called the Security Council, the provisional
Provisional,
rules of
yes.
procedure. Yeah, you knew that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's, you know, so 76 years later, they still haven't actually finalized, or they still haven't sort of gavelled a sort of conclusive rules of procedure. And I think that it's deliberate because I think having the provisional rules of procedure gives them a bit of leeway. It sort of suits everyone so that they can sort of, you know, get round certain procedural things that might otherwise be tricky if the rules of procedure had actually been set in stone, shall we say. So it's interesting. In the Security Council, they always talk about whenever, you know, if you go to a meeting and then the president will start and he'll say, and under the provisional rules of procedure of the Security Council, so-and-so has been invited to participate in this meeting. So just be aware of that with the Security Council. It's provisional rules of procedure. And in Chinese,
that's 临时议事规则. It's basically you add a professional.
Okay.
That's 临时. Yeah. Kind of temporary.
Yeah, again, so don't say,
thing.
you need to sort of say the provisional, if you're at the unit, it's like the provisional rules of procedure. Don't say like the temporary or the interim rules of procedure. You need to know it's the provisional rules of procedure. Okay, so now on to the Security Council. There are, so I've highlighted for you the permanent members. Security Council. Okay, equitable geographical just distribution. This is a concept that comes, so not just in the Security Council, comes up everywhere. There's various delegations stressing the need to ensure equitable geographical distribution, and that in Chinese is.
The original is 地域上之公均分配. I never say that. So my version is 地域分布均匀. Yeah, which is also shorter.
I mean, one of the things that's often mentioned in the sort of context it's often mentioned with is when it comes to the Secretariat staff ensuring that within the UN, every region gets its fair share of people working at the UN. That tends to be the sort of context it's most frequently mentioned, but yeah, it comes up a lot. Equitable geographical distribution.
Also for non-permanent members, right? Because there are like a few countries from a certain continent. Is that also like
well, it's the regions are
distribution?
I mean, it's done to regional groups. It's the distribution between the regional groups. So you have you have the African group, you have the Western European and others group. So it's not, it's usually, I guess within those groups they have their own distribution. But I think so the focus is on each regional group being fairly represented. And the one thing they often talk about, by the way, is speaking of the Security Council. That's an area actually where this is a big deal because the developing countries, shall we say, often stress that there's not fair geographical distribution. The Africans will say that there's unfair this geographical distribution because they say that they are underrepresented in the Security Council, and they'll say that they're even though, shall we say, the majority of situations before the on the Security Council's agenda are situations in African countries. So yeah, it's a very big deal there, and they're always talking about revitalizing the Security Council, revitalizing. There's always, in New York especially, every few months you get into a meeting on revitalizing the Security Council, and the they talk about the machinery there as well. I think the machinery might get mentioned there. And there's always like this big talk about how they're going to sort of revamp the Security Council, include, there should be new permanent members, or taking away the veto is a big thing at the security, either that they talk about, or that more countries, or that there should be not permanent create more permanent members, the veto, more geographical distribution. And it's a lot of, there's just talk, and they've been talking. Where are we?
Yeah, this is the same thing. Like
Okay, non-permanent members. All right. Oh, okay. So this whole expression, this is a really important one. The primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. That's a really important. This notion of primary responsibility. What's that in Chinese?
The original is 维持国际和平及安全之主要责任 ，so 主要责任 primary responsibility. My version 首要责任为维护国际和平与安全 ，so 首要责任 primary responsibility.
Okay, so know that. So yeah, especially going into English, you want to be using that. You want to be pretty much getting that word for word, primary responsibility, maintenance of international peace and security. Okay. Okay, so diversion for armaments. This is something that's often used. This it's just interesting, this word diversion, and it does come up a lot in any meetings to do with weapons. For example, the Arms Trade Treaty, and one of the big sort of goals of the Arms Trade Treaty is to prevent the diversion of weapons from licit channels into illicit channels. Okay, so that's the word. That is the word. The mot juste, they really want diversion. And so, in the Chinese,
the original is 消耗于军备, but to be honest, I've never heard of 消耗于军备. Usually it's 挪用于军备, so 挪用 for diversion. That's often used in discussing nuclear issues.
Okay.
Yeah. 消耗 is more like consumption.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why it's the original translation. Yeah.
Right. And now this is the Military Staff Committee. This is an interesting little committee I've highlighted here. So they meet in New York. You would get assigned to it every now. I would get assigned to it every now and then. They are basically the only committee, possibly in the whole UN, but certainly in New York, whose meetings would start on time. They would start absolutely on the dot. So they are basically the military attaches of the 5 non-permanent. Well, I think every most delegate, maybe in a lot of delegations have military attaches, but the Military Staff Committee is specifically, it would be the Russian, the American, the Brit, the French, and the Chinese, the chief military attaches meeting. A lot of it, what it does is quite theoretical. It's quite abstract, because I don't think at any point, I think the idea was it would be, if some real big conflict was to kick off, and if the UN had to basically deal with a whole foe as the UN, I don't know, if the Martians invaded, the Military Staff Committee would probably get summoned, and they would work as one, is the idea. So what they do is, because as I say, there's never really much use for them, is they game a lot of scenarios. So you'll have people coming to make presentations, from the peacekeeping, some of the peacekeeping chiefs of military chiefs, and they'll say what the situation is there, and then they'll hear that the Military Staff Committee will hear them out, offer advice and things, but it's all tends to be fairly theoretical. So with them, there is the possibility that at some point they really might leap to the fore, okay? But thus far, they tend to be a sort of, you don't hear that much from them. But it is important to recognize them. It's important to know who they are. The Military Staff Committee, and that in Chinese is
军事参谋团.
Okay, so there you go. So it's important to at least get the name right. The MSC, they're sometimes referred to by the acronym, the MSC.
Right, I have definitely seen it. I have no
Right.
idea what that
To
is.
be honest, and I say the ones that they would always meet on time, on the dot, and to us, they're the most friendly as well. Funnily enough, so but these guys actually were very civil. They'd always come into the room and they'd always say, all of them would sort of say hello. They'd always sort of nod to the interpreters in the booth. It's like, all right, you sort of appreciate that. Whereas obviously your average diplomat just thinks you're a magical voice somewhere in the roof coming into his ears, and there's no human being behind it. But anyway, let's go on. Voting. Okay, so here we go. Subsidiary organs, and then I said performance of its functions. This phrase that comes up quite a bit.
Yeah, 形式植物, which is just the normal collocation. Yeah, in Chinese.
Okay. So here we go. Now this is the sort of one, if you like, phrase in the UN Charter, which is a bit archaic and which doesn't really get used, but it's an important issue. It's an important idea. Pacific settlement of disputes, not peaceful, but pacific. But it's okay. You can say peaceful because you can say peaceful dispute settlement, peaceful dispute resolution. You can say that fine. But as I say, if you want to impress, if you're doing an exam, perhaps, and you want to really impress the person marking, if you say Pacific settlement of disputes, then the person marking your exam will think, oh, they really have good knowledge of the Charter. And so in the Chinese, is it an archaic expression as well, or not?
No, it's peaceful. 和平
Okay,
解决,
so it's still pretty much the same one as pretty much used today. Okay. So these are two important chapters coming up, by the way. So chapter 6 and chapter 7. So when situations on the ground are getting a bit tense and getting close to conflict, they'll first of all start. The member states, the Security Council will start to invoke initially chapter 6, really to try and get, to try and find some sort of, settlement before things go too far. And it's interesting here, you've got, okay, so to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security is often a collocation that will be used throughout the Charter, and in Chinese that is
危及国际和平与安全之维持 or 危及对国际和平与安全的维护 but endanger is just 危及 yeah,
okay,
one to one.
So it's in danger that they use rather than maybe jeopardize. You might think, oh, maybe endanger and jeopardize are pretty much synonyms, but in the Charter they like to go with in danger. And then here you have all these sort of instruments, these sort of forms of attempted settlement. The ones that you hear, okay, negotiation. Inquiry sounds a bit unusual to me. Mediation you hear a lot of. Conciliation you hear conciliation. Arbitration you hear. Judicial settlement, yeah. Resort to regional agencies. So anyway, there's a few different modalities. That's a good UN word. Modalities that they offer here. Anything unusual there in the Chinese?
Not really, but it's just very difficult to kind of differentiate
Yeah,
mediation, conciliation, and arbitration. I feel like they're the same.
Right.
And you've got to find different words for them.
That's right. Yeah,
if they come up at the same time. If they don't, I'll just pick one. Probably. Yeah.
I think mediation tends to be more.
It's the most common.
You've got a guy, the most common, like a guy is appointed as the mediator, an envoy is appointed as a mediator. Arbitration, I think, is maybe when you take it to court, where maybe when you sort of refer a case to like the International Court of Justice, let's say. That's, to my mind, that the idea of arbitration is settling it through sort of more legal means. How that then differs from judicial settlement, I'm not certain. And then conciliation, something similar again.
Yeah. I've actually heard a lot of this phrase "good officers."
Oh, the good, yeah,
good officers. Yeah,
that's a very good expression to know. They do use it a lot. The good offices of the Secretary General. Often, if the Secretary General himself tries to step in somewhere, they'll refer to his good offices. Yeah, that's right. Good one to know. Good one. And how do you say good offices in Chinese.
Yeah.
How do you say it?
I think the translation is like conciliation, 调解.
Oh,
So
okay.
they are like the same.
Okay,
Like,
there you go. All
yeah,
right.
just pick and choose.
It's good
I
to know that
guess.
one. Good office as well.
Yeah.
That's well spotted. Okay, now go on.
All right, that's
Endanger the maintenance
again.
again of international peace. Pacific settlement again. Okay, so this is just important. Just the use of the verb here, referred. So things are referred to the International Court of Justice, or things are referred to the International Criminal Court. Okay, so it's important to know that. Or you talk about if you're using the noun, a referral to the ICJ or a referral to the ICC. So in Chinese, anything
It's
is
提交, which is submission. So
okay.
that's not really legalese in
Okay.
English.
So make
Referral
sure
is
you're
pretty much
saying, yeah,
legalese.
make
Yeah.
sure, yeah, submission doesn't sound right, or it's quite specific, that notion, the referral. Okay, so try and get it, remember it as referral. Go on.
Please.
Now we're getting really to the, okay, so we've got endanger the maintenance, specific settlement of the dispute. Now, chapter 7's the biggie. Chapter 7's the really important one. This is when the shit really hits the fan. Action with respect to threats to the peace, breaches of the peace, and acts of aggression. Okay, and that in Chinese is
对于和平之威胁、和平之破坏及侵略行为之应付办法。My version is 应对威胁和平、破坏，应对威胁和平、破坏和平及侵略行为。Slightly shorter, but still quite long.
okay.
Yeah.
So now the difference with chapter 7 is that chapter 7 resolutions are binding. So chapter 6 resolutions aren't binding, non-binding, if you like. Chapter 7 resolutions are binding. How would you say those two words? And it's important to know those two expressions in Chinese, actually.
Binding is 有法律效应. So it's not an adjective. In English, it's just one adjective, but in Chinese, it's a phrase. 有法律效应. That's binding. If it's non-binding, it's 没有法律效应. So like without the effect of the law, that's the direct translation.
Yeah. Okay. This is, as I say, really important. So in English, you've got to say binding. It's not obligatory. It's not compulsory or anything like that. You need a binding. I'll give you some. So, and what happens is that they'll invoke. States will invoke. That's the important verb you need to know. Chapter 7. Okay. How do you say that?
It's 援引. Yeah, I had to look that up because it appeared later in Chinese.
Okay.
But 援引 is the one-to-one translation for invoke, and if you do legal translation, that's the word that you have to use if you see invoke.
So I'm just looking up here. So examples of chapter 7 resolutions in sort of recent history. I know what the most recent, most important one was for Libya, resolution 1973. That was a chapter 7 resolution. Other important ones, okay. International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, UN operation in Somalia. Let's see, Special Tribunal for Lebanon. Yeah, Libya is perhaps the most, in recent times, the most sort of important time. Because obviously for Syria, I think they wanted to do it for Syria. The West, I guess, wanted to invoke chapter 7, but they never did. So they were able to invoke chapter 7 for Libya because I believe the Russians abstained, and I guess the Chinese probably abstained as well.
Most likely.
Probably abstained, yeah, right.
But not.
Where are we? Let's go on.
Right.
Okay. So again, this is just an interesting turn of phrase, to give effect to its decisions. This was interesting for me. Just in French, you'll hear donner effet à ses décisions. And it always, actually, when I've heard that in French, I always think, gosh, how do I put that into English? I say something rubbish like put into practice or implement. I mean, in Chinese, what's the equivalent of implement? That word, nothing else springs to mind but implement.
Yeah. So this 实施 is actually implement.
Okay, right.
Yeah, we don't say give effect, but the French like donner is to give, right?
To give effect, so in French,
So
it's words the
it's
same.
the
Yeah.
same. Yeah.
Uh,
In Chinese, it's to implement the
you use
also.
the sort of implement word, right?
Yeah. And one thing to know is that decision, which is actually legalese in English, it's not to make a decision, as in
Mm-hmm.
not in common sense, but the Chinese is 决议, which is also the translation for resolution.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
interesting. All right. The same word, huh?
same word, but if you go
Okay.
into English, then it's different. It depends on the context.
Right. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
that is important. You need to know the difference. Yeah. So unless they're actually speaking about
if it's
specific
UN resolution, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I guess you need to know the context, don't you? If it's something
yeah.
specific or not. Okay, there you go. So watch out for that. Let's go on. I think that's the highlight really of the chart. I think there's a few things here and there left. Okay, we've got fulfillment of the obligations, again, enforcement action, again, military staff committee. As you see, it gets mentioned quite a bit. Oh, now the chiefs of staff. Now, when we were preparing this, Zoe had a bit of a question for me about the chiefs of staff. Maybe you'd like to ask the question again.
Yeah, so I was wondering whether the chief of staff is just for like a military committee, or can it be for an office?
Okay, so in English, 95% of the time it's going to be to do with military matters, the chiefs of staff. You got the joint chiefs of staff. I think they're the top American military brass. Now, I know the American president has his own chief of
Yeah.
staff, but yeah, 90%, 95% of the time it's to do with military officials. So
Yeah,
what is the word
okay.
then that you use in Chinese for
It's 参谋总长 or just 参谋长. Yeah.
that? Okay, let's go on. Again, here we have preventive or enforcement action. Okay, now this is an important element in chapter 7. This is going to be about the right to self-defense, which is like a sovereign right of state. So in English, nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations. One little thing within that, to impair the right. That's a good little collocation of words to know. To impair the rights. Okay, that's sometimes a word that I sometimes struggle to find that word. Like the one's right, it won't impinge on the right or hamper, but that's the best word to go for, to
Right.
impair someone's right to individual or collective self-defense. And as then you have the right of self-defense. Is there anything interesting in the Chinese equivalent?
So in Chinese, it's the same. Like there is a set expression for to impair the right, which is to 损害 certain 权利. 权利 is right. 损害 is to impair.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the right of self-defense is
自卫权. 自卫 is self-defense. 权 is the right.
okay. Okay, let's go on there. But yes, that's the two most important things from from chapter 7 is, as I say, the right to self-defense, and the idea of the fact that they're binding, those chapter 7 decisions, that they are binding, legally binding. Okay, chapter 8, just regional arrangements. This actually gets taught quite a bit just in English. It's just good to know the name of that chapter, regional arrangements. What is it in the Chinese?
The original is 区域办法. Nowadays, usually people say 区域安排. So arrangements usually get translated as 安排 in Chinese.
Okay. In the blue, then, I just highlight consistent with the purposes and principles. That's a good word in English. Okay. You have all those, in keeping with, in accordance with. This is one of the ones I use a lot, actually, just saying consistent with that. I like to use that. Let's go on. So again, Pacific settlement of local disputes. Okay. So international economic and social cooperation. Again, this is an important idea: respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. What's that in the Chinese?
So it's 尊重人民平等权利及自觉原则. Basically, it's a literal translation.
Okay.
平等权利自觉原则.
That's again, it's this often gets referred to the self-determination of peoples. These concepts often get invoked, like when talking about Palestinian, the Palestinians, for example. That's a big thing to do with self-determination, and some of these other, I mentioned it earlier, Western Sahara. We'll talk about self-determination there and so on. Just in the split for blue, universal respect for and observance of. That's just interesting use of vocabulary here. The observe. I think in English, you have this, like when we work, say from French, we have this tendency to overuse to respect human rights, because the French always talk about respecter. They're always respecter loads of different things. Whereas in English, you do actually tend to use observe on the, it's better English actually to observe these rights, observe these privileges, observe procedures, for example. It's just to highlight that word, the idea of observing and its meaning, because you will hear it quite a bit, and often it's better than respect, actually. Not a big deal, but...
Do you think it's okay to translate like observance as to protect? Because the Chinese translation links towards like protection.
Is that right?
Rights. Yeah, you'll see that
I
later,
think
kind of 捍卫.
Protection is a bit stronger now, I'd say. I mean, in English, you talk about the promotion and protection of human rights. Right. That's a package that always comes, and it would be stronger than the promotion and observance. I think protection carries a slightly stronger nuance.
Right.
Okay. Again, specialized agencies, I think. Okay, again, just an interesting collocation here. Discharge of functions. They often talk, it's high register. They'll often say, rest assured, our delegation will help you in discharging your mandate or in discharging your functions. You will hear that. Don't get thrown. Discharge can sometimes be something unpleasant in the
I actually got thrown
context.
Off by this phrase in a speech.
Okay.
And I got super confused because I was thinking discharge, like you can discharge somebody from the hospital. So
you got that as well, actually.
If you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. So I got super confused with this discharge.
Yeah, this use of discharge is perfectly sort of polite and high register. Yeah, discharge a mandate, discharge a functions.
I can discharge somebody, let somebody go. Yeah.
You wouldn't say to you discharge from the hospital, but you wouldn't.
Yeah.
You know what? In the army, dishonorable discharge. You would use it actually in that context as well. Talk about an honorable discharge, a dishonorable. I think it's particularly with the military though. You wouldn't say it for someone's job. Dismissal, you would use for all things outside the military. Okay, go on.
Anyway, so the Chinese is 履行职务. That's quite a normal collocation. No confusion here.
Okay. See, on to ECOSOC. Okay, so again, the use of observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Again, that package, the human rights and fundamental freedoms.
Yeah. So the original 人权及基本自由之维护. 维护 is like maintain and to protect, and this is 保障人权及基本自由. 保障 is to protect and to maintain. So, yeah, it's a bit different from observance. In English.
You think it's like stronger? The Chinese is slightly
it's slightly stronger. But then that's what we usually
That's just what you say, right?
Yeah,
that's
like
the thing, isn't it? Yeah.
But the connotation is slightly different.
Right. I mean, I don't know if see this idea, the promotion and the protection of human rights, this might be a sort of new collocation that's sort of come in over the decades, over the years. Because here you'll notice they don't make any mention of promotion and protection of human rights. Okay, we have respect and observance. So it's possible that this promotion protection is something that's just, it's something newer. It's a newer sort of concept. Maybe it was precisely to give it a bit more oomph, a bit more strength, you know. So okay, to give effect to, again, expression there. Okay, deliberations. That's just, you know, they talk a lot about deliberations, and they'll often say, the Russians often talk about how is it the Security Council, the General Assembly is the principal deliberative body. Okay, so you just want to have a, how would you, so what's the Chinese for this word, deliberations?
So the original is 讨论, which means discussion, but nowadays you're going to hear 审议 in the Security Council and also in the General Assembly. So that's the set translation.
Okay, and how would you say a deliberative body?
Just use 审议 as an adjective.
Okay.
Yeah, 审议委员会, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, let's go on. Okay, so this is just a bit from this, you know, the trusteeship. This is to do with the trusteeship council. Again, it's just good to recognize this non-self-governing territories. Okay, so those are those territories that have basically got still a colonial ruler. So again, if you if you happen to run into something on the Western Sahara or whatever, the Falklands or this is an expression. It's good again, just at least recognize it, non-self-governing territories, and that in Chinese is
非自治领土. It's a direct translation.
Okay.
Nothing tricky here. Yeah.
This is a principle that's often evoked at the UN. So the general principle of good neighborliness, good neighborly relations.
Yeah.
What's that?
So the original is 善邻之道, which I don't think I've heard of it, but usually it's 睦邻原则 in Chinese, and like Chinese officials often talk about 睦邻友好原则, so good neighborliness and friendship.
Yeah. Comes up a lot, comes up quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, again, just interesting use of just some interesting words here. International instruments to which members of the UN may respectively be parties. So this is something you'll hear a lot in English. You know, they're a party to this and that treaty, or a party to this or that convention. It's just a sort of collocation. It's an English sort of expression you want to be comfortable with, you know, saying it.
Right, it kind of it melts away in the Chinese translation, but as in parties to a treaty is 缔约国, so it's like signatories. Right?
Okay, there's more signet. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, you'll have all these meetings like MSPs, a meeting of state parties, that you'll hear in English, the state parties to a treaty. So and so in the Chinese, state, like the conference. So when you have all these big environmental summits, the COPs, the conference of the parties.
Then still 缔约国, I think it's the same as signatory.
Okay, so that's an important. So again, so if you're going into English, don't say it's the conference of the signatories or the meeting of the state signatories. Make sure you're saying the parties. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and also instruments. This word used to trip me up a lot because it has different Chinese translations in different contexts, and in this legal context, it's definitely 文书. Not we don't say 约章 anymore. It's definitely 文书.
Okay.
There are other like non-legal instruments, right? More like tools.
Right? Instruments is better to say generally in English. Yeah. You can say tools, but instruments is a bit higher register.
Yeah. I was just saying, when you translate that into Chinese,
if
it's not in a legal context, then it's not 文书. The translation will be like tools. Yeah.
Okay.
As in 工具 or 手段. Well, that's like measures. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is again just in that sort of set vocabulary set that you might need, like if ever you're doing this business about the non-self governing territories. So the administering authority is the one who's in charge. Okay, that's like it was the colonial power, if you like, the administering. So you have the administering authority and the non-self governing territory. They're the sort of two opposing parties, if you like, in that sort of context.
It's 管理当局.
Okay.
Nothing special here.
And so, yeah, if ever you work at the UN, if ever you get assigned to a meeting of the fourth committee at the UN, so that will be going on at the moment, actually. So all these committees will be meeting now, all these first, second, third, fourth committees. So the fourth committee is the one from the Trusteeship Council that deals with all the remaining outstanding decolonialization questions. They always meet in the same room as the first committee. The first committee meets in the morning and the afternoon, or it was when I was there, and then the fourth committee would meet in the same room in the afternoon, and it was often petitioners. So you'd have people from civil society or whatever who've petitioned, who've basically applied to give statements at the UN. They're petitioners to argue their case and so on. So that's what the reference is to accepting petitions. It's so if you do happen to have a meeting in that, just be aware of that word, the petitions, the petitioners, and so on. And in Chinese, it is
接受请愿书. The 请愿书 is petition.
Okay. And in fact, here, if you just stay there, so you have the administering authority, and if you look at paragraph 3, the trust territories, actually, that tends to be, when I was saying the sort of the two sides in the equation, it's actually the administrating authority is like the colonial power, if you like, and the trust territory is the land itself that I guess is wanting independence.
Right. So I guess in Chinese, this trust
yeah,
is like the trust from trusteeship.
Yes.
And that's 托管. Yeah, nothing to do with confidence.
Okay, right. They're entrusted. Exactly, it's they're entrusted.
Entrusted, yeah. That's 托管. Yeah.
Okay, International Court of Justice. Just be aware of it. In Chinese, it is
国际法院.
Okay. The ICJ is say an oft used acronym there.
Yep.
And then some interesting vocab here again, Article 94, paragraph 2. It fails to perform the obligations incumbent upon it. And that in Chinese is?
不履行应负之义务 or 不履行应负的义务.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, similarly, have a recourse to the Security Council. Again, this is, very high register.
Yes.
But that you will hear, and you need to know what it means, and you need to be able to put it into reasonable Chinese so it's understood. And so what is?
Original is 向于安全理事会申诉. Nowadays, recourse is 诉诸, so just 诉诸安理会.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, again, just of those, perform obligations, you might hear more now, fulfill commitments, deliver on commitments, that sort of thing. Incumbent upon it. I like that. That's a very high register.
Yeah.
And so what the ICJ issues, they issue advisory opinions. So you need to know that expression with anything to do with the ICJ on, again, they're there to sort of decide on, to give rulings on generally sovereignty disputes. So I know Serbia and Serbia over Kosovo, all of that as well. Spratly Island, right. Bolivia and Chile, they sort of have a dispute over some patch of land. So there's a lot where the ICJ has delivered an advisory opinion, and in Chinese, an advisory opinion is
咨询意见.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay, getting close to the end now. Maintenance of international peace and security. Again, refrain from any action. Again, abstain from, desist from our alternatives as well.
Yeah, the Chinese is like to avoid. doing
Okay.
something. It's 避免.
No, yeah. Okay, again, just a useful collocation here in English: to invoke a treaty, to invoke an article, invoke an agreement. In Chinese,
it's 援引条约. If
okay.
it's to invoke a treaty.
I think. Okay, ratification should be deposited. Just like they talk about, the depository. They often talk about the instruments. The depository is the person, is the body that receives the ratifications. Actually, so when you ever hear talk about, often a country will talk about having submitted its ratification instruments with the depository of the treaty. So again, just so that you know what it's referring to. What's that in Chinese?
So a deposit here is 交存, like to deliver, to submit, and then the United States is going to keep safe of it.
Exactly. So it's the word just submit. Yeah, it's just that.
交存, so it's submit and for the United States to keep safe.
Okay, so just when you hear we talk about ratifications, we'd like to deposit them. I mean, no one's going to kill you if you say submit, but the charter language is deposit, right?
Yeah.
And that, I think, ladies and gentlemen, is that. Just if you just scroll to the very bottom, right at the bottom, it's 26th of June. Okay, look, 26th of June, 1945. That was specifically the day when the charter was signed. There you go. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, that was the UN Charter for you in fairly a brief, in a sort of idiot's guide, shall we say, to the Charter. Hopefully now you know a little bit more about it. Those of you who are watching, you know now what are the sort of important elements to take from it. What I will do is in the description box below, I am going to leave links to all the translation, well, the English version and the Chinese version, so that you can sort of compare and cross check them. One other thing I'll leave a link to is during the COVID, like about a year ago, okay, when like at the height of the COVID, when there was no meetings going on. So my work, they were trying, they were giving us other work to do that we wouldn't perhaps do usually. And myself and it was more actually my colleague and friend Dylan Westfelt. We compiled a glossary on the UN Charter. Now, basically taking all the important, so lots and lots of expressions. We haven't been able to go anywhere near through all of them, but he did it from French and Spanish into English, and I supplied the Russian version. Now, because I don't speak any Chinese, there was no one actually did a Chinese version, but it's still a really good glossary, and it takes you through all these really important terms. If nothing else, it's useful to see them maybe for you in the English, and then you can look them up in the Chinese. But it's good for you to see what we considered to be the important terms in English. So I might try and leave a link to that in the description box as well. And if anyone feels like doing a Chinese version, you're more than welcome to try, and I'll post it. I'll give it to everyone at the UN. You'll be heroes. You'll be stars. Zoe, any final comments from you? Do you feel suitably enlightened now as to the UN Charter?
I feel less confused.
Less confused, okay.
Yes, maybe not yet enlightened.
Well, that's less confused. We can do with less confused. It must be tricky, as I say, if your Chinese version there, if it's got all this slightly archaic language. So I guess that's an added obstacle, I guess, for you guys. But anyway, hopefully between me and Zoe, we've shed a bit of light on the stuff that you need to know. So, guys, if you've enjoyed the episode, if you found it interesting, if you've learned some new stuff, please do smash the thumbs up button. That would be greatly appreciated. And if you're watching these episodes, getting benefit from them, please do subscribe. please subscribe. That's all I ask. That's all I ask. Share it with your friends there. Share it with your fellow interpreting, translating buddies who you think might be interested. Keep following me on the LinkedIn group. You'll notice that Zoe has started putting in little site translations from time to time. She's done 2 in the last couple of weeks. I'll be finding her more texts to do, so she'll be doing more of those. So keep following me there. Any last words from you, Zoe?
Well, watch, like, share, and subscribe.
In Chinese, please.
In Chinese, I would say, 请大家观看、分享、点赞、关注。
I couldn't have put it better myself. Okay, guys, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you all again. All that remains for me to say is, and Zoe's going to do this next time, by the way. For the next episode, we've agreed that. But anyway, for now, it's going to be me. All we have to say is that episode 95 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.